122 years.
Yeah.
And 164 days.
It's a number that just, it stops you cold, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It feels less like a biological fact and more like, I don't know, a typo in the grand spreadsheet of existence.
It honestly feels like fiction, like something out of the Old Testament or a fantasy novel where, wizards live for centuries.
Yeah.
But today, we are not talking about myths.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into the life of the woman who actually lived that number, Jeanne Calment, the so-called doyenne of humanity.
And honestly, calling her the doyenne almost undersells it. We're talking about a lifespan that bridges two entirely different versions of human history.
Right.
She was born when the fastest way to get around was a horse, and she died in the age of the internet, of cloning, of space stations.
That's exactly why we need to do this deep dive. We've got a massive stack of sources here, biographies, mathematical studies, investigative reports, even some graphology analysis. Our mission today is to unpack a case study that is equal parts history lesson, biological mystery, and, well, true crime thriller. We are going to walk through this case file page by page.
Thriller is the right word, because on the surface, this is a celebration of human potential. It's the gold standard of aging.
Of course.
But lurking in the back half of this file, in the later chapters of the story, is a controversy that threatens to tear the whole record down.
It gets incredibly messy, and I really can't wait to get into the detective work. But before we get to the accusations and the forensics, we have to understand the legend itself. So let's start with page 1.
Okay.
I'm looking at the opening image in our source material. It's that iconic photo of the elderly Jeanne.
You know the one. That deeply lined face, eyes that are somehow still incredibly bright and sharp, just staring right through the camera.
And in this version of the file, the artist has overlaid it with Van Gogh's Starry Night.
Which feels so appropriate, right? It visually ties her to a past that feels almost mythological to us now.
It cements her status not just as a person, but as a piece of living history. Like she's a monument rather than, a human being.
Exactly. She is the benchmark. 122 years, 164 days. No one else in recorded history has been proven to live longer. And the thing that strikes me, looking at the notes on her personality, is that she just didn't seem weighed down by it. She wasn't this somber, ancient sage. She had this wicked sense of humor about her own decay.
I love that quote of hers. I've never had but one wrinkle, and I'm sitting on it.
That wit is actually a huge clue. We often think of longevity as just, diet and exercise, but her psychological resilience, that ability to laugh at the absurd, that might be the most important variable in the whole equation.
That's a great point.
But to really get how someone survives to 122, we can't start at the end. We have to go back to the starting line.
So let's turn to page 2 of the file. Context is king. We are dropping into 19th century Arles, France. The date is February 21st, 1875.
Okay, so to put 1875 in perspective, the telephone hadn't been patented yet. The Eiffel Tower, it was still just a controversial blueprint. It wouldn't be built for another decade. The world was quiet. No cars, no airplanes, no cinema.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that. She wasn't just born a long time ago. She was born into a fundamentally different human experience.
A silent world compared to ours.
And looking at her family background, she wasn't exactly scraping by, was she?
Far from it. And this is a crucial piece of context. Her family were shipbuilders and carpenters, but they were established. They had roots in the region going back to the 17th century.
So she was deeply embedded in the local social fabric. I saw the note about her childhood home that it incorporated the porcelain Calment Tower.
Right, which was a remnant of an ancient castle.
You don't grow up in a castle remnant if you're, struggling to put food on the table.
Precisely. She was part of the rising petty bourgeoisie, the artisan class that was becoming the middle class. And that matters because it gave her a buffer. She had stability, better nutrition than most, and crucially, she was insulated from the brutal physical labor that ground most people down in the 19th century.
Speaking of history brushing up against her life, this is where it gets really interesting. Page 3. The Van Gogh connection. This is the story that always makes the headlines. It's 1888. Vincent Van Gogh is living in Arles, and he walks into her uncle's fabric shop.
To buy canvas, supposedly. Now, fast forward 100 years. It's 1988, the centennial of Van Gogh's stay in Arles, and suddenly the world realizes there is this little old lady who actually met him.
If I'm telling that story, and I want to make myself sound interesting, I'm probably going to say, oh, he had a burning intensity, or I could see the genius in his eyes, romanticize it.
That's the halo effect, right? We retroactively assign greatness to our memories. But Jeanne, she didn't do that.
No, she absolutely roasted him.
Yeah.
She described him as, and I have the quote right here, dirty, badly dressed, and disagreeable. Very ugly, ungracious, impolite, sick.
She basically called one of the greatest artists in human history a creeping weirdo.
Exactly.
And that, ironically, is what makes the story so credible to historians. Skeptics have argued that maybe she just absorbed local folklore and claimed it as her own memory. That happens with extreme age, memories get fuzzy.
Right.
But the specific, unromantic, and frankly negative nature of her description feels so real. It feels like the genuine reaction of a teenage girl serving a difficult customer.
It cuts through the myth. To her, he wasn't a genius. He was just a rude guy who needed some canvas.
Exactly. It grounds her in reality. But if we look at her life after that teenage encounter, we see a pattern emerging that explains her longevity better than any single thing. Page 4 of the file calls it a life of leisure.
Leisure seems like an understatement. It sounds like she lived in a bubble.
A bourgeois bubble, yes. She married her cousin, Jeanne Calment, who was quite wealthy. And here is the key data point. Jeanne Calment never worked a day in her life.
Never. Not even a little side hustle.
Not in the traditional sense. She didn't toil in the fields. She didn't work in a factory. She didn't even really manage the shop. She had domestic help for the cooking and cleaning.
So while her peers were wearing out their joints and backs, she was preserving her energy.
She was preserving her body, but she wasn't sedentary. And that's the key distinction.
Oh, right.
The sources list her activities. Fencing, which she did until she was 85.
85.
Hunting in the hills of Provence. And cycling. She was still riding her bike until her 100th birthday.
That combination, high physical activity but zero occupational stress, that seems like the magic formula.
It's the Goldilocks zone of longevity. She had the resources of the Calment shop, ensuring she never worried about money, and she had the free time to keep her body moving.
And she had a philosophy to match that lifestyle. She said, I took pleasure when I could. I acted clearly and morally and without regret.
That without regret part is huge. Psychologically, rumination, constantly worrying about the past or future spikes your cortisol. It wears you down. She didn't grind, she lived.
But she was also incredibly savvy, or maybe just the luckiest person on earth. This brings us to page 5, which I think is my absolute favorite story in the whole file. The world's worst business deal.
Ah, the Voyager system. This is a classic French concept. It's essentially a gamble on death.
For you listening who aren't familiar with French property law, let's set the scene. The year is 1965. Jeanne is 90 years old. She's a widow. She has no heirs left. She has this beautiful, large apartment in the center of Arles.
Enter André-François Raffray. He's a notary, basically. He's 27 years old.
Half her age. He looks at this 90-year-old woman and thinks, okay, this is a safe bet.
The deal is simple. He agrees to pay her 2,500 francs a month for the rest of her life. In exchange, when she dies, he gets the apartment.
It sounds like a slam dunk for him. She's 90. Actuarial tables would say she has, what, 2 years left? 3, maybe? He's probably thinking he's getting a luxury apartment for pennies on the dollar.
Mathematically, it was a brilliant bet, until it wasn't.
The twist is absolutely brutal. Raffray paid her every single month for 10 years, then 20 years, then 30 years.
And then in 1995, André-François Raffray died. He was 77.
And Jeanne?
She was 120, still sitting in her chair eating chocolate.
It's the ultimate irony. The man who bet on her death died first.
And it gets worse for his family. His widow had to continue making the payments. By the time Jeanne finally passed away, the Raffray family had paid more than double the market value of the apartment.
Over $180,000 in equivalent value. And her reaction was so cold, she just said, in life, one sometimes makes bad deals.
It highlights her resilience, but also that dark humor we talked about. She outlived the man betting on her demise. But this brings us to the pivot point in our deep dive.
Right.
Because up until now, this has been a story of triumph, a fun story.
But page 6 of the file is where the music stops. This is marked the accusation. And suddenly, we aren't in a biography anymore. We're in a detective story.
In 2018, more than 20 years after she died, a bombshell dropped. 2 Russian researchers, Nikolai Zak, a mathematician, and Valery Novoselov, a gerontologist, published a paper.
And their theory wasn't just she lied about her age. She was much more specific and disturbing.
They claim that the woman who died in 1997 was not Jeanne Calment, born in 1875. They argued it was her daughter, Yvonne.
Okay, let's look at the official timeline first. Yvonne, according to the records, died in 1934 of pleurisy.
Right, but the Russian theory flips that completely. They claim that Jeanne was the one who died in 1934.
And the family, realizing they were facing a crippling inheritance tax, which was apparently around 35% on the family business, decided to pull a fast one.
The theory suggests a switch. The family buries Jeanne, but the death certificate says Yvonne. The daughter, Yvonne, then assumes her mother's identity. She wears her clothes, she answers to her name.
So for the next 60-plus years, Yvonne is pretending to be Jeanne, which would mean the woman who died in 1997 wasn't 122.
She was 99.
Which is still a very respectable age.
Yeah.
But it's not a world record. It challenges the entire premise of her fame.
And they didn't just throw this out as a hunch. They brought what they called forensic evidence. Let's look at page 7, Exhibit A.
They went deep into image analysis. First up, the ear.
The ear.
Yes, the ear.
Mm-hmm.
Biometrically, ears are very distinct, almost like fingerprints.
Yep.
They change size as we age, they get bigger, but the structure, the fold, they generally stay the same.
Okay.
The researchers compared photos of young Jeanne with the elderly doyenne and argued the ear shapes didn't match. They claimed the elderly woman's ear looked more like Yvonne's.
And they also flagged the eyes. There was an old ID card from the 1930s that listed Jeanne's eye color as black.
But the famous 122-year-old Jeanne clearly had gray eyes.
Now, eye color can fade with extreme age and cataracts, but black to gray is a pretty significant shift. And then there was the height issue.
Right, people shrink.
We know people shrink as they age. But based on the photos, the survivor appeared taller than the typical shrinkage models would predict for the original Jeanne.
And they even analyzed her signature. They claimed the loop on the J in Calment changed style right around 1933.
It's a collection of inconsistencies. I mean, individually, maybe you can explain them away. But when you stack them up, the ear, the eyes, the height, the signature, it forces you to pause, you know?
And then we have page 8, motive and opportunity. We established the motive, the tax. But the cover-up details are spooky. The investigators point out that Yvonne, who was supposedly dead, was married to a man named Joseph Bilot.
Right. If the Russian theory is true, and Yvonne was alive pretending to be Jeanne, she was living with Joseph Bilot for decades.
But if she's pretended to be Jeanne, Joseph is her son-in-law.
Exactly. But if she is Yvonne, Joseph is her husband. They continued to live together in the same apartment. The investigators flagged this as highly suspicious.
I mean, living with your son-in-law for decades after your daughter dies isn't impossible, but it is unusual. They also noted that Madame Calment ordered many of her personal photos burned later in life.
Destruction of archives is always a red flag in historical investigations. Why destroy the evidence of the past unless you're hiding something?
And then there's the smoking gun, or what they claim is one, the census records, specifically 1954 and 1962. Jeanne is listed as mother and widow in the household.
And the investigators argue the specific phrasing and arrangement were bizarre for the time if she were actually the mother-in-law. It hinted that maybe the census taker knew something was up.
It's a compelling narrative. It reads like a movie plot. The desperate family, the swapped identity, the decades-long masquerade.
We have to be careful here, because the scientific community didn't just roll over and accept this. We have to look at the defense.
Okay, page 9. The social fishbowl. This is the logic check.
Think about Arles. It's a small provincial town. Everyone knows everyone's business. The impossible deception argument is very strong here.
Right. In 1934, Jeanne was 59. Yvonne was 36. That is a massive visible difference.
Exactly. For a 36-year-old woman to successfully pose as her 59-year-old mother in a town where they were both well-known figures, think about the logistics.
The servants in the house.
Family doctor, the priest, the shop customers.
Dozens, maybe hundreds of people would have to be in on the secret. Oh, hello, Madame Calment. You're looking remarkably young today.
And they'd have to keep that secret for 60 years. Conspiracies usually collapse under the weight of the number of people involved. It's highly unlikely that the entire town of Arles agreed to defraud the taxman and never said a word.
But there's also hard medical evidence, right?
Yes, this is crucial. We know for a fact that the real Yvonne had pleurisy and likely underlying tuberculosis issues. That's what killed her, or allegedly killed her. TB leaves scars. It leaves markers.
And the 122-year-old Jeanne.
She was examined thoroughly by doctors. She had no history of TB, no scarring. If the survivor was actually Yvonne, hiding in plain sight, she likely would have carried the biological evidence of that disease.
That's a really strong point. It's harder to fake lungs than a signature.
And finally, we have to bring in the math geeks, because a lot of the skepticism comes from a gut feeling. 122 is just impossible, so it must be fake.
Right. Page 10 covers the mathematical verdict.
People see an outlier and assume error. But studies, specifically one by Lennart and colleagues, looked at the statistical probability. The chance of a supercentenarian reaching 122 is estimated at about 1 in 5,595.
So rare, extremely rare, but not zero.
Exactly. Think of her as the Roger Bannister of aging. Before Bannister ran the 4-minute mile, people thought the human heart would explode if you ran that fast.
He was a biological wall.
It was, and once he did it, our understanding of the limit shifted. Jeanne Calment is that outlier. She represents the extreme edge of the bell curve, not a violation of it.
So if we accept the mainstream scientific consensus that she was the real deal, the question shifts back to how. We talked about the lack of stress, but page 11 gives us the secrets of the supercentenarian regarding her actual habits. And I have to say, this diet is surprising.
It's the Mediterranean diet taken to a logical extreme. She poured olive oil on everything.
And chocolate. The sources say she ate 1 kilogram of chocolate per week. That is 2.2 pounds.
And she enjoyed a glass of port wine after meals. But we can't gloss over the vices. She smoked cigarettes.
That's the part that breaks my brain. She started smoking at age 21 in 1896. And she didn't quit until she was 117.
That is nearly a century of smoking.
It's the ultimate paradox. Any doctor will tell you smoking shortens your life.
Of course. But in her case, it just speaks to her genetics. She was just built differently. Her cellular repair mechanisms must have been off the charts to handle that kind of sustained damage.
So don't try this at home, folks. Smoking will not make you live to 122.
Definitely not. But I think her mindset was just as important as the olive oil. We touched on it earlier, but the notes call her immune to stress.
Her quote, "If you can't do anything about it, don't worry about it."
We hear that advice on Instagram all the time, but she actually lived it. She didn't dwell. She didn't let cortisol eat her alive. Even when she was frail, she kept that humor. Towards the end, she said, "I have legs of iron, but to tell you the truth, they're starting to rust and buckle a bit."
Ha! She was sharp to the very end. So what does this all mean for us? Page 12 reflects on the immutable legacy.
Well, when you step back and look at the span, it's humbling. She lived through the entire evolution of the modern world. She saw the birth of the car, the plane, the rocket, the computer.
And despite the Russian theory, the record stands.
Yes. I mean, there are calls for DNA testing, exhuming the bodies would settle this once and for all, but the family and the French authorities have pushed back against that. So for now, she remains the benchmark, the gold standard of human potential.
There was one final thing she said that stuck with me. A little darker than her usual jokes. She said, "God must have forgotten me."
It's funny, but it's also heartbreaking, isn't it? It implies a profound loneliness to that kind of longevity. Everyone you ever knew, your husband, your daughter, your grandson, your friends, even your notary, they're all gone. You are the last one standing.
That is a heavy price to pay for the record. Before we wrap up, let's quickly acknowledge the evidence locker on page 13 so you listening know where we got all this.
Yeah, we've drawn from a diverse stack today. Adventures with Van Gogh by Martin Bailey gave us that incredible artist encounter. We relied heavily on the human longevity record by Lennart and colleagues for the math.
And of course, the controversy was fueled by the paper Jeanne Calment, The Secret of Longevity Unraveled by Zach and Gibbs. We also looked at the validation work by Robin and Allard, and travel notes from the Empty Nest Explorers to get the feel of Arles.
It's a mix of hard science, history, and investigative journalism, just like her life.
So, we've reached the end of the file, and I guess the question remains, who was she really?
Here's what I want you to consider. Let's play devil's advocate. Even if the skeptics are right, even if she was only 99 and it was Yvonne all along, think about what she accomplished.
Okay.
She scammed the French government for decades. She met Van Gogh, or at least maintained the legend of it, and she became a global icon. That alone is a wild story.
That's true. A 99-year-old con artist who fooled the world is almost as impressive as a 122-year-old saint.
If she was 122, if she really was Jeanne, then she redefined what it means to be a human being. She showed us that the ceiling is higher than we thought. She proved that the human body can endure a century of change, a ton of chocolate, and a lifetime of cigarettes, and still keep laughing.
I think I prefer that version. It gives us all something to aim for. Maybe not the smoking, but definitely the chocolate and the no-worry attitude.
I think we could all use a little more of that Calment philosophy.
Absolutely. So, listener, your homework is simple. Eat some chocolate, pour a little olive oil on your dinner, and stop worrying about the things you can't control. You might just live forever. Thanks for diving in with us.
Until next time.